Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Jason with Bent's Woodworking and welcome to part 2 of the shop relocation. In this video, I'm going to be talking about my entire move process. I'm going to be covering topics such as the different moving systems that I used, some things that worked really well, some things that didn't work really well, some lessons learned, and some recommendations that I'd have for you guys moving forward should you ever need to relocate your shop. And in this video, I will also be covering the prices associated with each of the options that I chose. And it's going to be pretty good because I actually used 3 different methods of moving for this. Now this is going to be a talking head style video, and I will put some different video clips as I talk about certain things up here in the corner, but I think the information is really useful, and I've gotten a lot of questions from people asking exactly how I was going to be moving certain things. As most of you know, I am in the Army, and I've been in the Army for the past 17 years, and when you're in the military, you can either have the military move your stuff for you, or you can do what's called a personally procured move, previously known as a DITY move, which was a do-it-yourself move. One thing I knew for certain going into this move is that I definitely was going to be moving myself, and I was not going to have the Army move my equipment for me. I figured this would be a really good idea simply because I have the shop. The house stuff I wasn't nearly as concerned about, but everything in the shop I was very concerned about. So knowing that I'm going to be the one responsible to move all that stuff just made me feel a lot better. So there's 3 different things that I used in this move. The first thing I used was a pod, pods moving and storage. The second thing I used is a Penske 16-foot liftgate moving truck. And the third thing I used was a 6x12, I believe, enclosed trailer from U-Haul. So I used 3 different companies, 3 different platforms to get all of my stuff from Georgia to Indiana. So before we get into it, I'm going to talk about the costs associated with each. The pod was the most expensive of the 3 options. That came in around $1,750. That $1,750 covered it from Georgia to Indiana. So with that being said, if you don't have a real long distance move, I'm sure the cost would be dramatically lower. And the pod that I chose was their largest size, which is their 16-foot pod. The Penske liftgate truck cost me about $600, and I will talk to you about why it cost me $600 here in a little bit once I start talking about each one of the platforms and what I learned. And then the U-Haul only came in around $220 or so, and that was from Georgia to Indiana. So now I want to talk about what I used each of these platforms for. The pod primarily had everything from our house, and the majority of boxes, actually, as a matter of fact, all of the boxes and cabinets and sustainers and any loose stuff from my shop. The only big item I put inside of the pod was my bandsaw. I had considered putting some other larger things in there. It just didn't work out in terms of space, but I was able to literally get everything that was in a box or a sustainer or any small items into that pod with all of my household stuff. The U-Haul I'm not really going to cover on this portion because the U-Haul didn't really bring any of my tools. It just kind of, that was the thing that we used to get everything up here that we needed right away. And probably the most beneficial thing that I used on this move was the Penske liftgate 16-foot liftgate truck. That truck housed all of my bigger items. CNC machine, table saw, router table, drum sander, everything large that was left in my shop, plus a few small household things that we didn't get on the pod. But for the most part, it was all of my major large tooling. So now I'm going to talk about what worked well with each of these platforms and what I really liked. So let's start with the pod. The thing that I liked the most is just the ease of use. I've actually never used a pod, and I actually had never seen a pod delivered until I started doing some research, and I thought it was really interesting the way that they actually deliver this container and drop it at your house, wherever it is that you need it. It was a really, really cool experience. It did not take very long, and as soon as they dropped it, I started loading it up. And so one of the things that I really liked about the pod is inside of it, it's basically split into 4-foot sections, and each 4-foot section has some 4x4s that kind of brace it in. And so what that allowed me to do was to pack from the bottom all the way to the top. And once I packed it all the way to the top in that 4-foot section, I just went and got some 7/16" OSB boards and basically just cut them down to the height that I needed, put them in there and drilled them into the studs, and basically just made a wall to where even with the movement of the pod itself, as it was driving down the road, nothing could actually fall forward and everything stayed where it was. The other thing that I really liked about the pod is that you pretty much have a month included with the delivery. So they dropped it off, and with the whole COVID thing, my move kept getting pushed back and back and back, and so I really could just change the delivery date or the pickup date or however it was, and I was able to keep that in my driveway as long as possible. And because of that, I could just add stuff each day as we packed, and it just worked really, really well. I could close the door, lock it, and it was great. Again, with the trailer, I'm not gonna cover that much. I mean, it's an enclosed 6-foot by 12-foot trailer. I liked it. It served the purpose. It was just a small load that we needed to get up here, but for the most part, like I said, there was really no tools that went in it. But the liftgate truck. So here's what I loved about the liftgate truck, is it had a liftgate, right? So that was awesome because it actually allowed me to upload and download all of my large tools without any assistance at all. The ramp itself is actually rated to hold 2,500 pounds, I believe, if you are centered on that rear ramp. So none of my tools bogged it down in any way, shape, or form. It was zero issues. And then the other thing that's cool about it too is you can drop it all the way to the ground, but you can also let it hover off the ground a little bit if you had some sort of lip or something like that, to where you can just roll stuff out. And that came in really handy when I was loading the stuff from my shop into the back of the truck. So then I didn't have to go off of the ledge or the little stoop that was in front of my shop door. Another thing I really liked about the liftgate truck is it was just completely wide open, very well lit on the inside naturally because the top canvas is so thin, and there's so many tie downs on the inside of it. Just there's zero shortage of tie downs inside of this, and that was a downside to the U-Haul, is there's kind of only like one or two. So it's not the best if you're trying to strap a lot of stuff down. And so with that being said, some of the things that I liked and I used a lot on this move was ratchet straps. And the ratchet straps just worked great inside of that Penske moving truck because there were so many tie down points. I was able to tie every single one of my tools down. None of them were shifting at all whatsoever. The second thing that assisted in things not shifting was the cellophane wrap that you can buy. You can buy like an entire roll of it. It costs like $10, $15, whatever, depending on the size that you get. And what I use that for is to kind of just enclose different tools. It was not providing any protection from something landing on it, but it did provide protection of keeping things nice and steady and not allowing other things to get in there and damage in a small sense, not a huge sense, because like I said, it's just cellophane wrap. But where it came in really handy was on my CNC machine. So it actually allowed me to basically completely demobilize the entire spindle assembly and keep it completely steady, because that easily shifts and moves from the vibrations. And this made it so where it did not move at all, not one bit. Worked really well, kept everything nice and tight. And it also allows you to put like your cables and stuff into it and really just keep those cables from falling down on the ground, which can be a huge pain. So the cellophane wrap is something I really liked about it. And then something else that I learned, which was really beneficial, is using one of these tough boxes. So I just went and bought one of these very large, I think it's like 4 feet long, tough boxes from a local Home Depot, and I put all of my clamps in there. Every single clamp that I have went in that box, with the exception of my really long parallel clamps. Obviously, one of the downsides to this is you do have to pay for them. They're more expensive than boxes, but they have so many uses in the future. And if I was to move my shop again, I think I would probably rely very heavily on a greater inventory of these boxes. While my case was extremely heavy for the clamps, it was actually really easy to move because of the wheels, and I was able to get everything into one box, and there's no way I would have lifted a cardboard box with all those clamps in it. So that was a huge plus, and I would highly recommend those moving forward. So what didn't work well? I'm gonna start with the trailer on this one again because it's not really that important on this move, but keep in mind, if you are going to use one of the enclosed trailers to move stuff, the tie downs are an issue. And I briefly talked about it before. There's just not a lot of points to tie down. So when you're going to look at that stuff, definitely take a look at those. The other downside to the trailer is that it's not nearly as high. So you're constantly crouched over. It is an option. However, in my opinion, it's not the best option. The pod, I would say the only thing about the pod that didn't work well, but is easily remedied, would be they do have some eye bolts that are in the 4x4s, and I believe those eye bolts, I think there was like 2 on the side, 2 across the top, and 2 down the side on each section. And I would assume that that's there to basically run cables or whatever through to use as points to block things or put some sort of, maybe a mattress or something, and then you could use some ratchet straps to kind of keep that mattress and essentially create a wall. They're not very heavy duty. You could add some, but it didn't really have that big of an issue with me because I wasn't looking for a bunch of tie down points, but something to be aware of if you decide to use a pod moving forward. And to be completely honest with you, I don't really have anything that didn't work well with the liftgate truck or that I'm not super impressed with. I would say the only thing to keep in mind is that when you drop that ramp all the way down, it does have a slight angle like this. And so like for me, when I was loading up my CNC machine, I actually had to come up with some interesting way to kind of use ratchet straps to get it up to where it wouldn't slide down. And once I was able to get it onto the ramp, I could then adjust the leveling feet to hold it while I released the tension in the straps, which then allowed me to, basically lift it up until it stabilized and was perfectly level. I was a little bit worried about it at first, but it ended up working great. I assure you that is by far the heaviest item that I moved on this trip. It is ridiculously heavy, and that liftgate ramp handled it no problem. So I don't really have any complaints at all about the liftgate truck. With that being said, I want to circle back to the cost on it. So when I went about reserving the liftgate truck, I was told that they don't do one-way trips because the liftgate trucks are only available at certain locations and they're tied to that location. I later found out I don't think this is necessarily true. So essentially what I had to do was pay for the mileage from Georgia to Indiana, and then from Indiana drive it back all the way to return it to the original location being empty. So therefore I paid for mileage to Indiana and back. As a result, my ticket ended up being around $600. So if you're just doing an in-town move, the liftgate truck is going to be substantially cheaper. But if you're moving out of state and you were to go with Penske and they were telling you the same thing, that you can't do a one-way, then just keep in mind that you're going to pay for mileage for both ways. However, what I will tell you is that that's probably still a lot cheaper than you hiring a company to come in and move all of that stuff for you, and then you're paying their mileage to get it to where you're going. So liftgate truck, typically, from what I understand, they are only for local moves, so that could give you an additional cost if you're doing a long distance move. In the long run, it all worked out because I actually had to still get my personal truck up to Indiana, and so this just ended up working out really well. Okay, so here's a few things that I learned during this process, and one is anytime you're using one of these moving companies where stuff is being transported on a moving vehicle, it causes vibrations and all these other things. Literally the only damage that I had inside of the pod was to like picture frames on the corners where it may have just been resting against the ground and rubbing a little bit. There's not a single thing of damage with anything else. No glass was broken, absolutely nothing. So my only recommendation is next time I would probably just wrap those items, whether it's in paper or bubble wrap or tools or anything like that. But again, I had zero damage minus those minor scrapes here and there. The next thing is that the less loose stuff you have, the better. Right? You're just asking for things to shuffle around, get broken. So the more you can pack in boxes, the better off. Now, I do understand some of my tools, like my Incra sled, for instance, that could not go in a box. Some of the wall cabinets and that kind of stuff couldn't go in boxes, but really limiting the small things really will make a huge difference. So I would definitely recommend investing in some of those containers or just a lot of heavy-duty boxes and pack as much stuff as you can. It'll just make your life a lot easier. With the liftgate truck, ratchet straps. Have plenty of ratchet straps. I used about 3 ratchet straps per large tool at a minimum. I would do one that went around the tool one way and pulled one direction, one that went around the tool the other way, pulled the opposite direction, and then I would wrap one around the tool and basically pin it to the wall. And it worked very well. Nothing could shift, nothing moved. I had a 9-hour trip and there was zero movement with any of those tools. Everything arrived perfectly safe, but it did require me to have an ample amount of ratchet straps. So spend 15, 20 bucks, go buy a few packs of 4, and I think you'll be good to go. But I'd rather spend $20 on 4 ratchet straps than go through the headache of trying to replace my table saw or CNC or anything else. And the last thing I learned is plan on more than you think you need, because I thought that we were not going to be anywhere close to filling up the pod and really even needing a 16-foot liftgate truck. even though it wouldn't have mattered because the minimum size for the liftgate was 16 feet. So it did give us that flexibility. But after loading the pod, loading the moving truck, we barely fit everything else that we had inside of the U-Haul. So I would definitely say if you think you have this much, you probably have more than that. And then obviously over the years, tons of tools build up, and that just creates a lot of stuff that needs to be moved. Final thoughts, this was definitely one of the easier moves, I would say, especially with all of the tooling. I'm really, really glad that we went about it the way that we did. All in all, I think the expense was well worth it, and I don't think it was nearly as expensive as it probably could have been. And I cannot recommend, if you're moving a shop or moving heavy items, a liftgate truck will change your life. It was the best decision I made on this move. And not far behind that is the pod. The pod was an excellent investment, and if we ever move again, or if we do home renovations, remodeling, anything like that, I would definitely consider having a pod just dropped in my driveway, load that stuff up. I know it's safe. When we're done, we can pull it right out. So that is how I went about moving my workshop and my home from Georgia to Indiana. If there's anything that I did not cover in this video that is related to the move, please feel free to leave your questions down in the comments section below, and I would be happy to answer them. Or you can head over to Instagram and send me a DM at Bent's Woodworking, and I'd be happy to answer your questions there as well. As I stated earlier, as you can see, my shop is in complete disarray. We're finalizing some stuff with the drywall and paint and everything right now, and hopefully in the next couple of days I'm going to be getting right back to it. Part 3 is going to give you an overview of all the modifications that I made to my shop. It's going to include drywall, paint, garage door relocation, epoxy floor coating, electrical, probably not lighting, that'll be a separate video, but it's going to cover a lot of different things and just give you a brief overview of how I went about doing each one of these things, and of course, the costs associated with each of them. That's going to do it for me for this video. I look forward to part 3, and until next time, get out in the shop, try something new, and I will see you in the next video. And please go do something in your shop, because I can't do anything in my shop yet except look at it and let my mind wander. But I'm almost there, so see you in the next video.